Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Letting everybody in.
We're all here on time early.
Not everybody, but a lot of us are.
I didn't want to miss when you're going to be gone because
I'll be here Wednesday and then I'm leaving forever.
forever.
Yeah.
Well, be
God's call.
specific. Be specific, Steve. That was negative
Why was that negative?
because you will be back.
I will return.
Yes.
MacArthur said that. And how many years did it take him?
Have no idea.
2.
Oh, okay. 2 Sundays will be gone.
Two Sundays. Okay, thank you.
2 Sundays
Yeah.
and a Wednesday. So, but anyway, Wednesday is the first week of October. But I shall return.
Good.
So I'm interested in seeing if it's any cooler up north than it is down here.
What's
was
the temperature there?
It was 69 this morning here.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'd say it's probably about 75 right now, on its way to 95 or 100.
Yeah,
Well,
we're not.
it's hot below here.
Yep.
Well, when Dad arrived, his car said it was 55 outside.
Ooh.
Yes, but he arrived before God even gets up.
Not quite, but hey.
Yeah. Aw,
So,
that's
hello,
cool.
Dad.
You there?
Yeah, they've muted themselves.
Okay.
Yes, because I know it gives feedback. But yes,
Oh.
Dad is here, Tracy's here, and I'm here.
Oh,
Good.
what's the matter? Tracy couldn't find another dog to watch, or what's the deal here?
I go back Thursday up into Wajak.
There you go.
Where do those people go? They're gone more than we are.
Yeah, they are. They go to Florida. They go all over the place. Michigan.
It's a wonder they have a dog.
Yeah.
They have 2.
Yep. 2 of them.
Yes, but you said they didn't go anywhere for so many years until they found you, right?
Yep. Now they're making up for lost time.
Aha.
Good morning, one and all.
Good morning, one and all.
Good morning.
Am I all or am I just one? I must be just one.
You just won.
Okay.
You tried to get all the humor in before the lesson starts. Actually, I even thought it was a good lesson, so that's pretty good.
A lot in there.
No, it was only 14 pages long. You know,
Oh, mine only had 13. I printed different.
that's your loss or my
My
gain.
loss.
So
You're
anyway,
bigger print.
yeah, well, being older than you, I have to make sure it's large enough for me to read it.
No, sir, you're older than
Well, year makes a huge
me.
difference. You know?
We're close in age.
Yes. Close in
Yeah.
age.
I'm the
Well,
oldest.
Papa and I are closer in age.
Okay, Peggy, are you closer in age to Marilyn?
No, she looks younger like us.
I'm 82.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I'm 91.
Whoa, you did good.
Yeah.
She has a good pair of jeans.
86.
So,
Oh, wow. Silly.
yes, it is.
Well, I had a grandma at 93. The cop stopped her for speeding. And her license was expired. Her car license was expired. And he said, "Oh, Myrtle, go back home and have somebody drive you to the BMV and get all those things taken care of. And just learn to slow down."
And her response was what?
She did. She was obedient.
Oh, wow.
That's good. At 93, I don't know if there's many people who would be very obedient.
That's
Yeah.
Well, I promised my family that I will not drive 80 miles an hour anymore, so I gotta set my cruise control.
At least you know where yours is at.
Up here when they're driving on I-95, they think that's the speed limit, so.
Goodness.
That's funny.
Well, I don't know if Marilyn remembers when we went on a trip with them out to Colorado, to Big Sky, Colorado, and we got to Montana. And we were starting to drive on the roads and there were no road speed signs. And that people were just blowing by me. I couldn't figure out what's going on. Looked at Paul. I said, am I doing something wrong? Paul said, no, I don't think so. So we got to the rest area, the first rest area, and I went up and I says, excuse me, but there are no roads, no speed signs on this road. He says, well, how fast were you going? And I says, well, I hate to tell you, but everybody was going past me. And I says, what is the speed limit? He said, reasonable and prudent. And I asked him what that meant. Well, what kind of car do you have? And I told him we were renting a Ford Granada, I think at the time. And he says, well, you can go as fast as you want. And I says, so reasonable is anything that I can keep under control? And he says, yep, that would be the prudent thing to do. And that's how I knew what reasonable and prudent were.
Well, when Paul and I were out west and we was pulling a trailer and with a truck, and I said to him, let me drive. In case something happens to you, I'll need to know how to manage this thing. And so I took over the driver's seat and pretty soon I looked down at the speedometer and I was going 80 miles an hour. And I thought, oh, I think I need to slow down.
Yeah.
Well, in Texas, there are several highways that 80 miles an hour is a reasonable speed.
There's
So
also a lot of highway cops, our policemen. So everywhere.
officers of the law.
Yes, all over.
Yeah,
So,
especially in our area, we have a speed trap that's along Fish Creek Road.
oh, Steve, I forgot to tell you, when I came home last night, there were 2 police cars hiding in there waiting for you, but you didn't come.
Are you talking about my stop sign?
Yes,
How do you know they were hiding in there and not talking in there?
there were 2 separate cars sitting in there watching.
Oh, side by side, window
No.
down.
Eating
No.
donuts.
I tell you,
That's funny.
they're just police everywhere down here. They just hired, what was it, 17 more officers in our county.
Good.
Some for the police force, some are on the we got constables down here, we got sheriffs down here, we got local police, and we have the state police. All of them patrol the area, so
Is that
should
because-
feel fairly safe.
Is that because you got so many bad people in your area?
I don't know. Well, actually, our area is a very nice area. I mean, it's just recently built up. I thought I was going to go take some pictures of our little mall down there to show you what it is that we live in. But houses right now, the lowest house price in our neighborhood is 380,000, I think.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we have everything from 380 all the way over $1 million.
Oh, my.
And so it's quite a complex. In fact, when we moved in, there were supposedly 5,000 units. And I don't know, Donna, how many figure they put in since we've been here?
I don't know.
I mean,
I
they're
don't
building
Quite
everywhere.
1,000. Oh, I don't think 1,000, but boy, they just keep building and building these
Yeah.
huge homes.
Yeah, they're not little, and we're all on city lots. So some of these houses literally have no front or backyard. I mean, they've got a few feet and that's about it.
Oh, my.
How
So
much
it's,
front yard do you have?
we'll take a picture and bring it up, but our front yard is probably 15, 20 yards or 15 yards maybe.
Okay.
Backyard.
Ours is pretty, and our backyard is pretty good size. See, not all the lots are exactly alike. We just got lucky. But
You'll
anyways,
get lost. You'll get lost when you come, when you get here, won't you? When you get in my yard.
oh yeah, I mean, your yard, you could put my whole house and my whole lot in your front yard easily. So that just gives you an idea of how big it is.
Yeah.
So, but we don't have any turkeys.
Oh, gosh. I just went out to chase them away again. A couple days ago, I had a flock of geese and a flock of turkeys. It's like, I don't know what was it with the geese, but anyway, something spooked them and the geese flew and the turkeys ran into the woods. I don't know if it was the hawk. I don't have any birds eating. I got all bird feeders out, but I got a hawk that is hanging around.
Well, you have all those feeders normally, so that's why he's there. Plus, it's his territory. So
I bet Marilyn could spare a few turkeys for you. so-
probably.
I would like to make them extinct.
Now, we don't have any Canadian geese in our neighborhood, but there are Canadian geese down here. So I think right now they probably went north as far as they could go just to get out of the 100-degree plus. But it's actually cooling down now. It starts out at pleasantly in the 80s and it works its way up. So I know I have to wear sweatshirts.
I was telling my daughter that I caught a mouse in a trap. And when I looked at it, it had at least 10 babies, probably when it got trapped. And she was freaking out that I would kill mice.
What would you do if she freaked out if I killed turkeys then?
She wouldn't like you either, Marilyn.
No.
Oh,
Okay, it's
Steve.
9 o'clock.
Real quick.
Yep.
I saw a video of you the other day that had 1.1K views. That little short clip.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I was very impressed with how many views that it had.
Yeah, they put it up and take it down. So the only way you're going to see it now is if you go to the Nativ website. But yeah, I was at 950 when it was last on the air. So obviously these are people
I
from
watched it
Nativ.
just like 2 days ago.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. First I
Maybe they
had
put
seen
it back up. Well, now that I'm famous
Yeah, okay.
it. And humble.
and humble, so I don't know which should come first, humble or famous. But anyway, let's forget it. We are live, so let's just go ahead and get started. And I want to, before we really get started, I want to just remind you that we are recording these now, and they're going to be played on Nativ's website. So I am back ordering all of my Jeremiahs and getting them on. I don't have any of the others, so, but I will work my way up to it. They like me to go back through some of my books of the prophets and share some of those with the people, because Rod is going to do doing the regular Parsha lessons, plus also so is a rabbi on Sunday morning. So anyway, so please, if you go back, watch our channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Today, I tried to make it a little different. And the reason I'm doing this is for the first 25 chapters, we're going to cover pretty much a lot of the same ground. Plus the fact we're not going to know exactly when these were recorded by Jeremiah the first time. Remember, Jeremiah had written these prophetic messages down before, and the king Jehoiakim had them ripped up and thrown away. And so God asked Jeremiah to rewrite them. And so he had his trusty sidekick Baruch do so, because he was languishing in a prison that wasn't much bigger than what he could fit in. And so he was where he was. And so these are kind of recorded messages, or re-recorded messages. And as we are going through the first few verses, if for those who get notes, you'll find that the notes are 13 pages or 14 pages, depending on how you do it. But I found a phrase in there that took me back. And so I spent a lot of time going back through some of the things that I had taught before. I don't know how many of you remember this book called Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. And this was written by Rabbi Avraham Sutton. And the text itself is called Living at the Edge of History. And so that'll become part of my text. In fact, it'll be most of what I'm going to teach. And I'm going to try to give you some history. One of the things that we're short on in America is history. We basically have eliminated it from most curriculums and gone to say that everything is racist. Well, not everything is racist, but everything is history. And we should understand from history repeats itself. And because history repeats itself, one of the things that you're going to have to know is that history, in a sense, is actually prophecy. And so we're going to watch history be revealed in the process today. So I want you to look at chapter 6. And I want to begin by looking at the Hebrew side. So if you have a Art Scroll Bible, it's on page 1084. Now, I know you're not able to read it in it, but I would like you to notice about halfway down the page, you'll find a little lamed on the outside with a line and then a space and then the rest of the line. That is what really is called, that whole section from break to break is called a parsha. And so what we're reading then from here is Lamed is 30. So verse number 30 starts with the Shin Mem Hey. Shema. Shema. Shema is the idea of listening, hearing what's going on. And as you're going through this, that is tied directly to the first line of chapter 6. Remember that the Jewish people did not create chapter and verse. Chapter and verse was a Christian idea, but they allowed it to remain because it made it easier for people to find where they were at in the text. But they did not change in the sense that they continued to write their chapters the way they chose, or their parshas the way they chose. And so actually, if we're looking at this, if we begin at verse 30, you're actually beginning at the first verse of chapter 6. This really is the beginning of it. It says, astonishing and disgraceful things have taken place in the land. The prophets prophesied falsely, and the priests dominated the people by their hands. And my people liked it that way. How would you like to be dominated? That seems to be something that was acceptable back then. But what will you do upon its climax? Because, everything has an end. So what are you going to do when you finally reach the end and the prophet's no longer dominating you? What are you going to do? The question comes so that one has to begin to understand that there's a lot more to the text. That Jeremiah has been walking around and he's seeing these things. And God, over the course of time, has been talking to him. In fact, some of the text today will be text where God is speaking. Some of the text is Jeremiah's own personal thinking as he's going through and going along. It's kind of like me taking time out to walk around New York City and tell you what I think, or San Francisco, or anywhere else. You see, many of the problems that San Francisco and New York and all the rest of them have, besides all the illegal aliens they have, is the fact that the city that's become so corrupt. And so we'll talk about some of that as we go through. But at the first verse, it begins by saying, "Come together, O sons of Benjamin." Now, he picks on Benjamin because Benjamin, first off, that's the area, Anatot. Anatot. That's the area where Jeremiah grew up. That's where his father and his mother lived. Now, remember, he was the priest of the temples. And so Anatot is not far outside the city. It would actually be more north and west of the city at that point in time. But it's in the section that is run by the Benjamites. The Benjamites and the Judites, those are the two tribes that really are technically left. Remember, the Sennacherib had come in and had begun displacing the Jews in the northern kingdom. And so many of them were gone. Some had returned and were now back living where they were. But he's really speaking specifically to the second group, the small group called Benjamin. Remember, Judah and Benjamin become very close when Joseph decides that he's going to keep Benjamin until his father gets down. And at that point in time, when they had been arguing over theft of their grain and all of the other things, Judah says that he would be willing to trade his own or die for them. I'll say myself. And so there was a closeness between those two families. If you go to the Temple Mount itself, if you go there even today, the Temple Mount is really the dividing line between the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Those two tribes actually occupy the Temple Mount itself. So he's talking to the second group, the smaller group. "O sons of Benjamin, out of the midst of Jerusalem, sound the shofar in Tekoa." Jeremiah is acting as though he were the watchman of the city. And being the watchman, your responsibility was to stand on the wall, and you were to blow the shofar to announce that there was an enemy approaching. Now, Tekoa is a city in Jerusalem, but it has no bearing on what's going on because it's too far away. The shofar sound wouldn't have reached it, and neither would the banners hanging over the city. But Tekoa actually has another meaning. You see, the letters of Tekoa are also the same letters as the word Tikkun, or Tekov. Tekov. Now, Tekov, we're never given an understanding of what it is, but Tekov is the word that means hidden essence. So we're going to talk about what's hidden here. We're going to go into the essence of what's going on. That's what he's complaining about. I want you to see what it's like, really. Now, that's having begun in chapter 5, verses 30 and 31, when he talks about what's going on. He now continues, and he now makes them aware. So they're supposed to go into the city for safety at this point in time. Now, the sentence doesn't quit there. It says, "And hoist a flag over Bet Harem." There was no city called Bet Harem. Harem speaks of a banner. And so many think that the bet, or the house, was actually a tower. And so hoist the banner over this tower, which would have been the tallest point at that particular place. "For evil can be espied from the north, and a major disaster." Now, remind yourself, the north was actually the side that was almost always attacked. It was the easiest side to breach the city of Jerusalem from. It's a mountainous side. If you've gone there, you know that it's a lot of rugged hills at that particular point in time. So as we're going through this, then understand that the problem will be coming from the north. If you read Ezekiel 38 and 39, you find that the same thing is happening. Gog and Magog will come from the north. In this particular case, it was Babylon that would be coming from the north. Verse 2 says, I had compared the daughter of Zion with a beautiful, delicate woman. The interesting thing is this is written in a past tense. I had. That does not mean now. That means it had been at that particular point in time. He compared them to a daughter of Zion, to a beautiful and delicate woman. Now, when you think of a beautiful and delicate woman in the days in which they lived, those were women whose skin was pink and blushed. Their skin was not tinted by the sun. They were not outside all the time. They were not the Shulamite woman that Solomon knew and loved. These women were basically princesses. Well, he considered the city of Jerusalem a princess, but not now. She had come and gone. And we say the same thing today about many of the cities of the world, and especially the cities in the United States where we see all of the things that are going on there. I would not consider living in New York City or San Francisco or any of the others. As we go on, we'll find out, well, look at verse 3. Now shepherds come to her with their flocks. The shepherds are the other nations. Now he calls them shepherds in a derogatory term. You remember when we were reading the book of Genesis and we were talking about the functions of the 12 tribes. Joseph didn't tell Pharaoh what his brothers did for a living, because everybody understood that they were shepherds. They did grunge work. They were uncouth. They were people that, well, you just didn't want to be around. Well, these shepherds brought their flocks, brought their people with them. And so there were thousands of these uncouth men. And they had pitched tents round about her, besieged the city, each one grazing in his place, saying, devote yourselves to war against Zion. Arise, let us attack at noon. Woe to us, for the day draws to a close. For the shadow, this is the phrase I want you to hear. For the shadows of late afternoon grow longer. That is a phrase that comes from many of the different prayers that are spoken during the evening. This is how they end the day. Notice shadows of late afternoon grow longer. One of the things that we begin to see as we grow older is the desire to go out and drive at night. My wife has already reached that point where driving at night's not one of those fun things to do. But at the same point in time, the question comes, well, why isn't that late night or night is such a way? And it begins in this case with the shadow. So it's, in other words, the sun is going down. And so as we're looking, the army says, well, let's attack at noon. And if they do, you have plenty of light by which you can see what's going on, and you can go from place to place. Now, as we go further down in here, we're going to find that they're going to build siege ramps. They'll take the trees out from around the town, and they won't worry about fruit trees or anything else, because God will tell them that I want you to leave the land desolate when you're done. So some of the trees will be taken and they'll be used to build siege ramps, walls, dirt in between. Others will be used to batter the front gates, or all the gates. Remember, there were 12 gates into the city of Jerusalem at that point in time. So they were building ramps and they were trying to break through the frame of the fence. But night was coming, when it would not be as easy to see your enemy as it had been at that point in time. But I want us to look at this phrase, this idea of shadow. Now, I showed you, I don't know, for those just tuning in, this is one of the books that I have. It's a monograph, and by a monograph, it's not a binded book, but it's actually a series of manuscripts that Rabbi Sutton has put together. And one of these, the title of the whole section is called Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And the thing is that I want to talk about the one that's called the living at the edge of history. Living at the edge of history. You see, in history, we have what's called a cosmic clock. If we go back to the book of Genesis and we go to the first chapter, we notice that the first chapter includes 6 days. The seventh day is the day of rest, and it's not included. We get up to that and we go into the second chapter. But as we're going through it, the Jewish people understood, or the sages understood, that mystically, the hidden essence of this is the fact that those 6 days represent 6,000 years. We today are living in the year 5,784. That's the year it just began on Rosh Hashanah. And so we're now in that year. And according to the Jewish understanding, this planet, the way it is, has a total lifespan of 6,000 years. Now, God can come at any time, send the Messiah, and that we will bring it to an end. And that's why he talks about Mashiach ben Joseph and Mashiach ben David first. But the understanding is that we have 6,000 years. Now, the Jewish people took that, or the scholars took it and put it on a clock. And I'm not sure you can see it. But here's a clock that was, this is the page. This is called Shana, which is the year. And so what we're looking at is a year on a clock. And actually this year is 1,000 years. So they divided the clock over a period of time into what we would call 4 watches. They had the evening watch, they had the midnight watch, they had the morning watch, or what was called dawn, and then they would have the noon watch. And then it would be back to the evening again. So that whole cycle would be 1,000 years. Now they began to look at that cycle, and multiple rabbis came to the understanding of things that were going to happen. Now, many of them they predicted prior to the events actually happening. In fact, there's no way, well, not for me anyway, to actually predict what's going on or what will be all the rest of the way. But understand, we're now moving towards the end of the day. If you were a Jew and you were living in Israel and Jerusalem, at noon on Shabbat, or the eve of Shabbat, you would be closing your stores and you would be going home to prepare for Shabbat. Your wife had been cooking all day long. The kids are driving her crazy, and you're going home to help get everything ready for that meal. Now you may have company coming over, kind of like an army coming. But the idea is the fact that you're preparing yourself for the final day. Now we know Shabbat is far different than any of the other 6 days of the week. Shabbat is the time of rest. But to get to that point of rest oftentimes requires you to go through lots of toil and labor-intensive work in order to get there. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Now, there are several authors. One that I quote in the manuscript the paper that I sent you was Chaim Dov Rabinowitz, who's a 20th century author, and he lived in Lithuania. Understand, Russia, Lithuania, Estonia, all of the eastern portion of Russia are filled with Jews, because that's where Sennacherib had sent them. And so those Jews lived there. Now, he wrote a book called Daf Sofarim, which is the idea of the recollections of the history of the 6 days. Only his recollection only dealt with the first 5 books of the Bible. But as he's going through it, he came to some interesting understandings. He was probably the first person I read that really did that before I read Rabbi Sutton's work. And it began by telling us the fact that it was Nachmanides, the Rambam, who really began to place everything into an idea. And now he's not until the 14th, 15th century. Now, it's in the autumn of 2000 or 1902. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe at that point in time was beginning to talk about what was going on. Now, I would have a fancy system for you. I am a teacher, but I obviously don't have control of the computer the way I need to. So I decided I was going to write notes for you. And that way, if you want, you can, if you rewatch this, you can just simply stop it, copy your notes or however you wanted to do it, and begin to look at what was going on. So I began by putting down shadows grow longer, which is what the portion is dealing with. Now, in this particular case, the rabbi's dealing with the 6th millennium, the whole thing. Now, at this particular point in time, we are in the afternoon. Noon started on 1990. That was the year 5750, 1990. That's when this whole thing started, this last day. And we're in the final hours of the last day. Right now, I told you we're at 5784 or 2023-24, because our calendar is different than theirs. So understand their year starts in September, October at Rosh Hashanah. Ours always starts in January. But I wrote for you, and it's in your notes, about page 3 if you have them. According to the rabbi, 1 day equals 1,000 years. 1 hour would equal 41 years, 8 months. If you look at it then, 1 minute on this calendar would equal about 7/10 of a year. Well, if you wanted to look at it, 1.44 minutes would equal 1 full year. So that's how it would actually look. So I began to take that idea or that information, and I began to put it into the timeline. Now, Rabbi Sutton uses a clock. I just simply, because I didn't want to spend time creating a clock, I decided I would do it this way. This is the time for the 6th day. Okay. Technically, the 6th day began at the nighttime shift, which was 1240 AD on our calendar. And the night shift would go all the way to 1490. That would be midnight. So your first shift would go from here. Now, this is if you were a watchman and you had the first shift, you would go from, because they had watchmen 24 hours a day on the wall. So you would go from midnight to, again, or from, I put down nightfall, which for this purpose is about 6 o'clock. Midnight is midnight, and that's 1490. Then I also went and said, again, the next quarter would be 1740, and that would be dawn. Now, I put in an intermediate time because between dawn and noon, there's an awakening time. You see, dawn does not begin when the sun comes up. Dawn actually begins prior to the sun coming up. It's the optimism that we have when we begin to wake up early in the morning. In fact, if you're coming early in the morning, sunrise is where the normal people wake up. But not everybody, not in the king's house anyway, do the kids have to wake up before 10 o'clock. So I gave you what's called a sunrise, which is the year 1790. And then finally, the noontime, which is preparation for the next day, begins in 1990. I hope you understand what I'm trying to show you, okay? So if you have a question, stop me, please. I have plenty of time. Okay. Nightfall. This is the first shift. It began in our clock of 1,000 years. It began in the year 1240. That's when it actually began. Okay. Now, I tried to make these bullet points a lot easier. You have more information in your text than I'm giving you here. That's why I say, if you want, stop me and we will go through it. But understand, 1240 was in the Muslim countries, Islam, 1240 was their golden age. That was the age when they controlled the all the way along the Mediterranean Sea. They controlled all of the Middle East. That's when their age was. In fact, they had two places in the world, Baghdad in Iraq and Cordova, which was in Spain. Those were the first two cities that were identified as having a population more than 1 million. They had libraries there. They had all kinds of information. All of their texts were there. So they were the centers for scholars on Islam at this point in time. If you go to Spain today or in that area, you'll find the Moors. The Moors were a form of Islam. They were the Arabs that controlled the land for a long period of time. And so that's what I'm trying to get across. Well, in 1260 of that year, 1260, again, this is 1240. I'm now in 1260. 1260 or 1236. I'm sorry, 1236. In 1236, Cordoba, Spain was conquered by the Second Crusade. And the city was basically leveled to get rid of all of the Islamic influence that was there. After that, Baghdad in 1248 was destroyed by the Mongols. The Mongols, remember, came from the Manchurian area. They came from as far over, and they brought with them their own form of religion, and they destroyed what was there. Kind of like ISIS destroying famous monuments to statues to the Chinese or to Buddha or anything else. Well, at that point in time, that was what was going on. But we also have to understand that this 1240 is the Dark Ages in Europe. During this time, they had the bubonic plague. During this time, there's the only ones who could read were the priests that controlled you and the kings that were over the charge of you, because there was no way for the common man to learn anything. They had, remember, what we call scriptoriums. A scriptorium was a place where they would gather 70, 75 men, and they would rewrite the Bible so that they could have multiple copies. Now, we understand today that if you go to look at your New Testament, which was written in Greek or Latin, depending on which group you had working for you, at that point in time, there would be a man sitting at the front desk. He would read out loud and you would copy what he was telling you, which allowed for a great number of errors. And that's why we have so many versions of the New Testament, differences between one and the other. Now, as you're going through this, understand at the same point in time in Paris, France, Paris was there. It was the year 1242, right in the middle of this destruction of the Islamics. 1242, the Second Crusade went through the city of Paris, France. Now, what they did there was eliminate anything that wasn't Christian. By that, I mean 12,000 manuscripts of the Talmud were destroyed, burned there in the city as they were cleansing the city of all the pagan religions. We continue on through and we talk about the fact that at that particular point in time, well, actually later, in approximately the 1400s, we're going to find that there's the greatest invention ever comes, the invention of paper. Remember, before this, paper was a scroll or a papyrus. It was something that would be rolled up. Now we actually have what I would call literal documents that they can write on. So multiple scripts were now being created. If you were a Jew, you were still using the same process. You would do it by yourself. You would read it. You would memorize it. You would speak it. Then you would write it. Then you would go back and review it. You would always begin upper right-hand corner with the first letter, or upper left-hand corner for the first letter, upper right-hand corner for the last letter of the first line, the middle letter of the middle line, and then you would do the bottom letters, and then you would fill in between. That's how you would do it, so that their scrolls were always exact, trying to make everything work. Well, with the invention of paper, which came in Spain, by the way, the invention of paper led rise to the idea of greater number of manuscripts. The more manuscripts that you had, the more educated your people became. The education of the people is going to cause a lot of problems, because now they're going to start interpreting the scriptures differently than you are. Now, the Jews have always had this, because the Jews, remember, taught their children from the very beginning, the first 5 books. They had to memorize them. But in the Christian world, the Christians didn't have that information. They were determined to be left alone. Well, something else was happening at that very same time. You see, there was with the abundance of paper, we began to find that there was a spread of the word called secret wisdom. Secret wisdom was Kabbalah. It was the Torah. It was Zohar. Zohar was now being printed. People were now having copies. They may not have understood what they had, but the copies of the Zohar. So you have Talmud, you have Mishnah, you had Midrashic writings, and now you have the secret writings, the secret wisdom. All of this was going on in that first block, that block that we would call the Nightfall. So by the year 1490, which was midnight, by 1490, we began to see a real change, a real outburst. Well, it was not all good outbursts, because you remember 1490, well, I've always used the expression 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but do you know what happened in 1490? That was the Spanish Inquisition. At that point in time, if you were a Jew living in Spain, you either convert or die, or you have to flee and find someplace else to go. Spain had become the heart of the Jewish movement outside of the land of Israel, because the land of Israel was still under the control of the Muslims. And so many of them scattered all across Europe. Many of them fled back towards Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, and all of that area. That's where they would be found after this. Those that converted, their name would be changed. They would become Garcia. All those Jews that converted became Garcia. Those that didn't flee, those died. Multiple different ways, most of them quite gruesome. So we began to see the spread of this wisdom across all of Europe, because the Jews were now spreading across Europe. As you're going through this, you also find out that it's the beginning of the Renaissance, 15th century. 15th century, Europe is starting to come out of the Dark Ages. They're now becoming more literate. They're becoming more involved. And so they began, once you teach somebody how to read, they soon become thinkers. They soon begin to interpret their own. In the United States today, we're finding that the people are, excuse me, timeout. In the United States today, since COVID, people weren't in school. People weren't learning. What's happened to the educational system in the United States? It's beginning to tank out. Why? because there's nobody teaching them to read. Nobody's teaching them to think. We're always telling them what to think. So we begin to create a society that they're dealing with in chapter 6 of Jeremiah. Now, as you go through this, there was a character called he wrote the book, Oratory on the Dignity of Man, Pico della Melodinero. Now, he was an Italian who hired a atheist Jew to teach him how to read Hebrew. He continued to teach him Hebrew, and he began to read their texts, including the Zohar. The Oratory on the Dignity of Man was his understanding of the Zohar and how it played into the life of men, into our dignity, into our thinking. And so he left them, or he began a period where everybody was beginning to learn. The nobles, I should say, were beginning to understand Judaism, not from a Jewish point of view, but from an Italian point of view. But it was much better than what they had before. Opposite that, in Germany and other places, the Reformation movement was beginning. The Gutenberg Bible had had been printed. So we now had multiple copies using the paper that had been invented in Spain. So the world was becoming, in that case, the world being Europe, was becoming more involved in understanding who God was. Meaning that the Pope and the rabbi and the priests were all having to work harder at keeping the congregation in line. But there were those that were thinkers, like Martin Luther and Calvin and some of the others, that began to break away from what they called idolatry. They took all of the statues of all of the saints and all of those things out of their church. And remember, Luther posted on the door his complaints. Well, it was the beginning of the movement. Gentiles were moving away from idolatry, and they were also moving away from Catholicism. Now, at the same point in time, some of the Jews that had been moving all over the European continent began to move back to Israel. Once they got to Israel, many of them found themselves in the northern portion of Israel, up near the Galilee region. And amongst them was a group that was located in a city called Svat. Svat was the city where Kabbalah, mystical understanding, paintings, poetry, all of the arts were now flourishing in Svat. One of the great leaders of that movement was Yitzhak Luria, who would be later known as the Arizal. He began to teach them the secrets of the Zohar. Not that they didn't know the Zohar, but he showed them the hidden essence of the Zohar. He began to teach them far more than they could ever possibly understand. In fact, he never wrote anything down. The writers were his students, those who listened to him. And he died at an early age, but in 4 years, he taught them tremendous amounts of information. That was part of this movement that was started by the Arya. Understand, this key time in Safat has had a great impact on the rest of the world as time has moved towards the end. This was a key point. Now it's about morning, the first watch. Now in the first watch then, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning that this first watch begins. So you go from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. We understand that after that, going from darkness to midnight, we call it the darkest time. And after midnight, we begin to sense the the idea that the sun will rise again. Well, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning when they actually begin the process of understanding. And the Arya had created such a knowledge and spread, he began to teach them about the Shekinah, or what some call the Shekinah, the glory of God. Because you see, he was telling them that it was the Shekinah that was actually suckling her children. In other words, again, increasing their understanding of the mystical, of the hidden languages within the Torah. So the Shekinah was one of those things that the Ari taught as we go through this. So there was new understandings that he taught. And one of the things that I want to talk about, and my wife and I were talking about it last night, there was a word that had a meaning. The word was called tikkun. Most people saw it as being repentance, but that's not really what the word means. Repentance comes from the word teshuvah, which means to turn around. Remember, in Christianity, there was a need for somebody else to help you turn around, to take care of all of your sins. Well, in Judaism, there is no such character. You're the one who has to turn around. You're the one who has to do that. What the Arya did was he taught them the understanding of tikkun. Because you see, the word tikkun means to repair. The Arya began to teach everyone they were responsible for helping to repair the world that God had created. That is what we were supposed to do. Everybody is responsible for their part. That's the idea of praying. That's the idea of studying. That's the idea of doing good works, that are mitzvahs, whatever you want to call it. So he began to teach it so that others began, the rabbis began to spread out across the country. And as they were spreading out with words, writings, things began to change across the world. So the Ari actually began the process of changing men's minds. Judaism especially, but there were those Gentiles that were very interested in what was going on, and they became illuminated by it too. So some would say God messed up, and we are here to fix the mess that he's made. Simple idea, but it's not quite right, but the understanding is there. At the very same time, with the Age of Enlightenment in Europe, things began to change because we were no longer spending our time with Galileo. We were now spending no longer spending our time with Aristotle. We were now talking about a character called Galileo. Not only was the world changing, but so were the heavens. Galileo, remember, with the telescope began to notice the stars, and he began to notice patterns in the stars. Up until this time, everybody said the Earth was the center and everything went around it. Galileo began the process of proving to everyone, no, we go around the sun, and the sun goes around. Everything goes around something. And so Galileo began a process of change. Well, that change not only happened in science, but that change happened in social issues. We're beginning to see at this particular point in time, we're beginning to see the idea of religious tolerance. We're also beginning to see the idea of ethics. We saw the idea of the fact that man was utterly sinful, that we had a part to play in this whole process. It's the beginning of social action. Social action today has probably gone too far because we have what's called the ACLU, who has already spent a great deal of time and money defending things that were totally contrary to the scriptures. And at some point, God is going to have to make it pay off. But this is the year 1573 when this is beginning to happen. Now, next, I have what's called dawn. This is the 3 o'clock. It's 1740. Now it's still dark at 3 o'clock in the morning. Can you imagine? But in the year 1741, there was a new Ari, the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov had been reading and reflecting and studying, and he was an orphan. He was an orphan from, well, both parents died, and so the city took him in, and he was allowed to live above the shul, the school. His jobs in the morning were to start the fire in the stove so that the kids, when they came to school, would stay warm. His second job, now this is in Russia, understand, his second job was to go gather the children and bring them to the shul. Now, Baal Shem Tov was not a normal, well, let's put it this way. He was a creative thinker. And he didn't naturally get the children to school by following path A all the way there. In fact, multiple times he would find himself taking the children through the woods, along the creeks, lots of different ways, talking to them about God's world. He spent a great deal of time talking to them about the angels that were in the grass that helped each blade of grass grow. He spent all of his days getting them to school, and then he spent his time upstairs while they were studying, listening. He too was taking classes from the rabbi who was in charge. From that point on, what happened? Well, took them home, came back, went back upstairs, and he began to borrow the books that had been downstairs, and now was reading and rereading and rereading and rereading. When it was all said and done, he was said to be one of the 70 secret men. The 70 men that actually are the reason that the world is sustained, because it takes 70 of these disciples, true disciples, who maintain the way the world is. If they were ever to quit, the earth and everything here would immediately be destroyed. Well, he found himself as a hidden one having a problem. Because you see, having taken the children all the way through all these different ways to get to school and to see all of that was in nature, how could one of these hidden ones not spend time telling everyone about God? And so as he grew older, he became more and more famous for his teachings. In fact, he ended up moving to a small town where they gave him a house to live in with a room big enough for him to teach. And he was never taxed. And there he lived, and there he taught, day in, day out, except when he made distant travels to see others or to seek others. But he began to change the way the Jews understood the scriptures, because he took them away from just the simple literal level, which we call Peshat. And he began to teach them how to string and find hints in the words and to find the deeper meanings of each word, knowing the meanings of the letters, the meanings of everything that was involved. And so he began to really change everything. The Ari started him. He then becomes great. Now remember, the Ari lived in Israel. He lives in Russia. And so there was this giant communication system that was going on back and forth. And as we go through this, he's now expanding the religious system. There were no longer such things as peasants, because a peasant couldn't read. A peasant wouldn't think. But the Baal Shem Tov got all of them to begin to read. They memorized. They began to grow. There was new ideas coming in the world. We created our first steam engine. Well, the first steam engine then began to change everything, because you no longer had to depend on solar power or water. You could now begin to expand all the ways that you were working with substances. Sun came up. The year is 1790. 1790. 1790, that one of the first things that happened was in 1792, when they had what is called the rights of man and the citizen. The rights of the man and the citizen. I don't know if you have ever read The Tale of Two Cities. Tale of Two Cities takes place in 1792. It's in England and in France that Charles Dickens writes about. These were the best of times. These were the worst of times. You see, 1792, man began to find his own voice, and everybody began to notice that they had rights. It was the time when Louis the 14th was executed, and his reign of terror was actually done. Remember, he was put on a guillotine. Well, at that particular point in time, that was going on in France and in England. In Russia, there was another thing going on. The Baal Shem Tov was in his prime last years. But in 1789, there was a man named Rabbi Shneur Zalman, who wrote for himself what he called the Spirit Manual for the Common Man. Later, that was changed, and it was only the first chapter in his book called the Tanya. But he began to write. In fact, the Jews who were in charge didn't like it, because he was teaching them how to be independent. And so they told the Tsar, and the Tsar had him arrested. Now remember, in France, they had already guillotined the king. So the Tsar was worried about rebellion. So he captured him, put him in the prison in St. Petersburg, put him out in the middle of an island so he couldn't cause any problems. And for 70 days, they questioned him over and over and over again, trying to get him to admit to the fact that he was organizing a rebellion. But when it was all said and done, all they could do was prove that he was a good man. Well, that was not the only thing that was going on. Besides that, in 1796, after he was freed, he began to meet with the Baal Shem Tov. And together they put together another understanding of the common man. Okay, the flood. This has nothing to do with a period of time, but it does have something to do with an age in the period. You see, it was 1840. That was the year when they first began to understand the 6 days. They first began by, well, turn in your Bibles to the book of Genesis, to chapter 7, and we'll look at one line and see if you see the hint. Genesis chapter 7. Now we're going to look at, in particular in this, the 11th verse. So you should be on about page 15 at this point in time. Okay. Here's the verse. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. Do you get the hint? It's subtle. You see, what happened at that particular time, it was the 600th year. Now they began to think about, okay, it was the 600th year of the first millennium. By now, the Ari has made it understood that time is repeating. And so they began to understand that the 600th year spoke of the 600th year of the 6th millennium, 1840. That's the year that this is all about. And in understanding that, they said, this will be a time when this century will be amazing. Now, remember, the century actually began in 1741. And now we're talking about 1840. So it's not a full century. It's not the full period. But according to the rabbis, this flooding that's going to occur here that flooding is going to be a flood of wisdom, great wisdom. Because you remember, the heavens above and the waters below met. Remember that? Genesis chapter 1, the days separated the waters from above from the waters below, and now all of a sudden the waters are gathered together again. And so what we're looking at this particular point in time is a period in time, and this period in time that we're talking about is the period which has great miracles, great understandings. Lots of things are happening. As you're looking at it, it's about the Industrial Revolution, because you see the Industrial Revolution started in about 1840. Remember earlier, they created a new power engine that didn't require solar, that didn't require oxes and donkeys. Now, as things began to develop, two things were also beginning to show up. Now, remember 1840. Well, within this period of 300 plus years, one of the things that we're going to begin to see is there was a man called James Clerk Maxwell. James Clerk Maxwell began to study science. He understood magnetism, electricity, and light. He had spent his life studying those three. And he finally wrote a book talking about how all three of those come from the same phenomena. That really, when you talk about magnetism and you talk about electricity and you talk about light, you're talking about the same substance, getting into the smallest particles. He began to talk about it in terms of quality and quantity. The greater the quantity, the better the quality. Well, as he's going through this, Rabbi Schneerson, who's going to be a Lubavitcher Rebbe in this last century, the last of them, they're waiting for the next one, who will be the Messiah, understood that at that particular point in time, the idea of what's called Ma'amar, M-A-A-M-A-R, Ma'amar. Ma'amar means to draw new light. James Clerk Maxwell began to create new light, new understanding. As he's writing, his writings seems to go dormant. But there was this little Jewish guy living in Europe at that point in time, having a funny mustache, marrying his cousin, named Albert Einstein, began to pick up on all of what Clerk Maxwell had been teaching. And he began to create in 1906 what we call E equals MC squared. He began to put together magnetism, electricity, and light into a formula. That formula was energy times mass times distance, or speed at this point in time. Sunrise, the idea of a new light that was now coming into the world, that was joining together the old light. Now, in 1848, which was a spring, was a very 1840, remember, is the time of this flood. 1848, now let me go back. 1840, there was a man called the Vilna Gaon who began to predict the coming of the Messiah. Now, everybody would say, well, he's obviously a false prophet because the Messiah never came. But Rabbi Zalman was talking with his son one day, and the son asked him, he says, should we ever believe the Vilna Gaon? How come we haven't seen the Messiah? And the rabbi turned to his son and he said to his son, the innermost part of his soul has now been revealed to us. You see, the Vilna Gaon began to teach about the soul of the Messiah. He's the one that began to come up with the concept of the Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef. He began to teach them about the inner workings. By 1848, a revolution began to happen all across the world, especially in Europe and especially in the Central and Latin American countries. 50 nations overturned their leadership. 50. There was a new community being developed at the very same time. You see, in 1848, Karl Marx wrote his first Communist Manifesto, the first working documents. And Russia was now going through a great upheaval. The Tsar was having difficulties with his people because of his intolerant ways. It was in 1939. 1939, we know, began the Holocaust. Now, the Holocaust really, well, let's put it this way. In 1492, we had the Spanish Inquisition. In 1942, we had a Holocaust. Was there any difference in the way the King Ferdinand and Isabella were treating the Jews than the way Adolf Hitler was? Listen to the numbers again. 1492, 1942. We took the same numbers and we reversed their order. We kept the first number where it belonged, 1, but the others began to change. You see, this was the beginning in 1939 of the 800th year. Now we're reaching now what's called noon. Noon is the last section that we have before we reach nightfall. Now remember, this earth is going to be for 6,000 years, and then God is going to reclaim what's there. So 1990 becomes a very significant year. It's the final watch. And if you remember, I told you that at this particular point in time, this is the time when everybody closes shop and they begin to go home to prepare for the final. Well, it just so happens 1990 was a very interesting year. In fact, the Rebbe called it the year of wondrous miracles. You remember Ronald Reagan had been president in that period of time. And you remember what his great line was? Rabbi Gorbachev, tear down that wall. 1990, the wall came down. USSR no longer existed. The 14 states that made up the USSR broke, and each one now is in charge of itself. That's why we now have a Russia-Ukraine war. The Cold War ends, technically. It'll start up again. But the Cold War ends. One of the things that happened was the Iron Curtain. Once it came down, Czechoslovakia was the first nation that actually said, I'm no longer a communist. We're going to be democratic. Things continued. The Russians and the Ethiopians were now allowed to Aliyah. The great migration of Jews came home. Millions left Russia. Many thousands left Ethiopia, heading for Israel. Now, the ones that were coming from Ethiopia are called Falashi Jews. They're related to King Solomon and the time that he was married to the Queen of Sheba. So those were the Falashi Jews, the dark-complected Jews. They brought with them their understanding of the Torah. Things began to change even quicker now. 1991. Desert Shield, Desert Storm. We began to see Saddam, who was insane, or who is Hussein, Saddam annexed Kuwait, because it couldn't pay its bills, so he decided to annex it. You remember that? Once he's annexed them, Bush and Margaret Thatcher decide, George Bush won, and Margaret Thatcher decided that they were not going to allow him to continue. So they began to build a bridge around Kuwait area itself. Eventually, they began to storm Kuwait in what's called Operation Desert Storm, in which they took back the colony that had been annexed. Oh, by the way, 1990, just at that point in time, that was the year Al Gore claimed that he had created the internet. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, he was the inventor of the internet. Of course, he forgot to tell AOL and CompuServe and BitNet and some of those others that he was the one who was doing it. Also, at that particular point in time, IBM was working on a new computer, not one that would take up an entire room, but one you could put in your pocket, a laptop. All of that began to go in 1991. And today we have moved further away from that. In fact, we're less than 2 hours away from the end of the day. Less than 2 hours. Now, I got all of that understanding from history, but I also got all of that from the key phrase that I read you before. For the shadows of late afternoon grow longer. Grow longer. It's morning here right now, but by the end of the day, the shadows will be growing long. And it always reminds me that we're running out of days. Now, if we have 6,000 years, and we're in the year 5,784, and if the rabbis are correct, that the last 210 years don't have to happen because Israel already has paid for those 210 years by spending that in Egypt. We have less than a dozen years for this planet to go the way it is. You possibly could be living in the last days. Okay, I've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes now? Think out loud with me. What struck you as we went through this? And I'll be quiet. Nobody wants to talk.
Lori must.
Bobby, you've heard this before. You go ahead and tell them what you know.
I was going to say Lori must be asleep.
Oh,
I did have a comment about when I read your notes about the exile. It would seem that one of the purposes for the exile was to spread the light amongst the world of the Gentiles. Not so good for Israel, but good for us. Another thing now that I thought while you were talking earlier on when you were talking about the idea of each individual person can fix something, that reminded me, clear back of Genesis 4, God talking to Cain. In chapter 4, verse 6 says, and Hashem said to Cain, why are you annoyed and why has your countenance fallen? Surely if you improve yourself, you will be forgiven. But if you do not improve yourself, sin rests at the door. Its desire is toward you, yet you can conquer it. Which means, no, you are up to yourself, your improvement. Now, God helps you, but it's still up to you, not somebody else. That this little story always troubled me when I was younger in Christianity. Why? Well, and then later on, it says that he left the present, verse 16, Cain left the presence of Hashem and settled in the land of Nod. Well, that was after he killed his brother.
Breaking down the world even more.
Yeah.
That's great, Bobby. That's great. I mean, again, that's application of everything that we've been talking about. They already told us that Tikkun was about repairing the world. You can't repair the world if you're depending on somebody else to do it for you. You have to do your part. Therefore, the idea of having an intermediary, somebody to substitute for you, doesn't work. It's up to you to do what you can do. So that was interesting. Mary, what you got to say?
I was just thinking about what Bobby just said. To leave God's presence, you have to be there to begin with, which goes back to what you taught us, that Cain was the one that was closer to God because God spoke to him face to face, or God
Right.
spoke to him, not he didn't speak to his brother. At least not that we have a recording of.
No. No, that's the important thing. Cain talked with God, which I find fascinating. We call him a murderer. We say that he has no rights, but yet at the same point in time, he was actually spiritually higher than his brother Abel.
And
He
that's
did
how
some
we
stupid
build,
things.
line upon line, precept upon precept,
Here a little,
there a little. The
yeah.
whole thing was fascinating. The whole, can't get enough of this history and learning.
But again, we have spent so much of our lives not studying or remembering history. That is what's been the fall of every civilization, is the fact that they, well, for example, what were we studying here? We're studying Judah, having watched Israel fall apart 75, 100 years earlier, are now doing the very same things that got them taken out, acting as though nothing's going to happen because, and we know that the whole thing, Jeremiah is going to spend the next 25 chapters dealing with this same subject. Now, eventually, towards the end, towards 44, 45 on back into the 50s, we're going to look at other nations. But here he's looking specifically at Israel, talking to them about these things. But the same thing he's saying to them, he could be saying to us here in the United States today. We're just not listening. We know since, what was it, over the last 5 years, the number of people who claim they are Christian has decreased to less than 50% in the United States now. Meaning what? What is their religion? Where do they go? What's happening? How have we lost track of God? That's the bottom line. Now,
From
I
what I
admit,
can see of the church, it's become a social gathering. There's not much real teaching going on. They take the word of God, and for example, if my son or my daughter decide to go into homosexuality, now all of a sudden it's okay because it's my son or daughter and they're friends, and it's okay because it's my kids. I remember as a child, Mom wasn't too much on us studying at home. I was always interested in history, but history is a subject you gotta memorize a lot of dates and really study it out. And we weren't allowed to do that at home. I didn't have enough time in school to do that and all my other schoolwork. So I always had a challenge learning where my heart really was at, was learning history. And now that I'm older, you're presenting that up to me again. And this time I'm getting somewhere.
I
So thank
appreciate
you.
that. Bob?
Another thing that makes a lot of sense is in your writing, and I can't remember if you spoke it also, is when you said that the world is sustained by two things, matter and energy, which is a part of his equation, which I find that interesting, and it should be obvious, but things aren't obvious until you really see them or you stumble on them, because this is the world of Beth, the world of
Oh,
two.
two.
So it would only make sense that that's what sustains it. And the other thing, that comment that we heard early on about the one became two in order to become one again, that must have been part of it. He's one and he had to make two to create this world.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, interesting.
Anybody else? Okay, do you want me to continue on with the rest of the chapter? Now, I didn't send you the notes on this, so you'll have to live without them, but you'll have to, well, I think you're smart enough. Let's go through it. So we're in verse number 6, okay? Now remember, Jeremiah is talking about the siege. He begins by saying, "For thus said Hashem, master of legions, cut down wood, cut down the trees, pour out a ramp against Jerusalem." So build a siege ramp. The siege ramp was made with the trees, dirt in between, so that it would actually ramp up so they could go over the wall. So build that up. Continues on to say, notice, the city, is being brought to account for oppression in her midst. So the city is the target. Why is the city the target? It's because of what the people in the city have done. God does not punish directly all the people. He punishes the wood. He punishes the brick. He punishes all of those things that we find and hold dear. Now, as a spring issues forth its water, so she issues forth her evil. Corruption and thievery are heard in her before me continuously. Hence, disease and affliction. Water coming from a spring doesn't stop unless the water runs out. So this water is pouring out. The evil that's inside the city continues to pour out over and over. Now, this water then has no sense of direction or distance. It just simply pours out. The result of it is going to be diseases and afflictions. Understand, the diseases and afflictions occur first before the war actually starts. God has tried on numerous occasions to change the people, but it doesn't seem to work. I can only go back to COVID over and over again. What has happened because of COVID to the United States? What has happened because of COVID to the world? How is the world now different? Now, remember, what led up to that was the Chinese releasing the virus. But what was going on in the United States prior to that? Remember, before Donald Trump was in office, the virus breaks out, and now President Biden is in charge. But imagine again, one of the biggest frustrations, first off, was the illegal aliens, and he was building a wall the best that he could. But at the same point in time, the cities were breaking down. Remember Portland, Oregon? 120 days of violence in the city. Seattle had built a 9-block square area of love that turned out to be less than lovely. All of the things were going on across the United States. God had already sent us a warning. He sent for us diseases and afflictions. That's what he had done for Judah. Now it goes on to say in verse 8, be chastened, O Jerusalem, lest my soul become alienated from you, lest I make you a wasteland like an uninhabited land. Notice what he says first, be chastened. Understand what's happening now. What am I doing? I am trying to get you to change. That may require a spanking, but if you don't change, it's going to require more than that. I will make this an empty land. That's what he's telling them. 9. Thus said Hashem, master of legions, master of the army. They will glean bare the remnant of Israel like a grapevine. Tell the besiegers, send out your hand again like a grape harvester over the shoots. So in other words, God is going to turn loose the armies of Babylon. But the army of Babylon, remember, invades the city not once, not twice, but 3 times before he finally takes out the temple. In other words, like the grapevines, send out your hand again. Send out your hand again. God warns us more than once. The problem is we don't see it. Therefore, we make ourselves susceptible to what's going on. Look at verse 10. To whom shall I speak and warn that they will take heed? Behold, their ear is blocked and they are unable to listen. Behold, the word of Hashem has become an object of ridicule to them. They have no desire for it. Key, I am filled with prophecies of the wrath of Hashem. This is Jeremiah talking. Jeremiah has been walking the streets. I am too weary to contain them all. So as Jeremiah is walking around Jerusalem, Jeremiah is receiving God's word over and over and over. We watch television at night, and if you watch the news, it doesn't take you long to see how many terrible things are happening and how over and over again you get the idea that the Americans are not on the right track. Excuse me. Pour this wrath onto little children in the street. Why are they in the street and not in school? And onto gatherings of youth, gangs, street gangs of kids. For men and women alike will be captured, and the elders with them of the very aged. Their houses will be turned over to others, and their fields and the women at once. For I shall stretch out my hand against the inhabitants of the land, the word of Hashem. For from their simplest to their greatest people, they all extorted booty. From the prophet to priest, all deal in falsehoods. Imagine Jeremiah is a priest and he's also a prophet. Imagine what he's thinking as he's walking around the streets and everybody is telling him how good things are and how good things will be. We continue to listen to the president on television, how Bidenomics is working over and over again. Is it true because he said it's true? That's the same thing that's happening here. Look at what happens in the next verse. They relieved the impending disaster of my people by making light of it. So don't worry, this too will pass, saying, Shalom, shalom. What does it mean, shalom, shalom? What does it mean when you have it back to back like that? It's a greeting.
Peace within, peace without.
So they're telling him you have peace all around you. Okay. Understand. The word peace has basically what, 4 letters that add up to 376. Okay, this is a math problem for you. 376 times 2 makes 5,000. Well, I'm just adding a number, aren't I? 572, 752, or the year 5,752. That year was 1992. That was the year of the Oslo Accord. You see, 5 is the prefix number that's added there. It's the other 3 numbers that count, but the other 3 numbers created for us the idea of the Oslo Accord, which happened in 1992. It's the 500th year since 1492 and the Spanish Inquisition. So when they say peace, peace, what's happening? A false peace is made, the Oslo Accord. Now remember, who created the Oslo Accord? Who was involved? Israel and Yasser Arafat. Has there been any peace created out of the Oslo Accord? No. Okay. Now make this. If we were to take and figure out everything in 7-year slots, making a Shemitah, a season of 7. 1992 was the 6th year of a 7-year cycle. 6th year. Well, in the 6th year of this cycle, Yasser Arafat declared an intifada. He went home. 2 months later, he declared open rebellion against Israel. Peace, peace. Now, let's go back and go from there again. Were they ashamed that they had committed abominations? They will never feel shame. They will not know humiliation. Therefore, they will fall among the fallen. At the time I punish them, they will stumble, said Hashem. Now, thus said Hashem, stand on the road and see, ask about the various paths of history. The various paths of history. Learn history. Which path is best? And then walk on it and find solace for your soul. But they will say, we will not walk. I appointed watchmen over you who warned you. Hearken to the sound of the shofar. But they said, we will not listen. Therefore, hear, O nations, know, O congregations, the evil that is in them. Listen, O land. Behold, I am bringing evil upon the nation, the fruits of their schemes, for they did not hearken to my words or my teachings. They rejected it. Why do I need frankincense? Now, frankincense, remember, is that substance that's put on the offering before that creates the odor that would be smelled all over the city. But you see, they didn't make the frankincense there. Look what it says. Why do I need incense that comes from Sheba, a country outside of Israel? Why can't you make your own? Or the aromatic cane that from a distant land? Your burnt offerings do not find favor, and your sacrifices are not pleasant to me. Therefore, thus says Hashem, behold, I am putting stumbling blocks before this people, and they will stumble over them, fathers and sons together, as well as the neighbor and his acquaintances, and they shall perish. We stumble when we choose not to obey. Bottom line. Now he goes on to say, thus said Hashem, behold, the people is coming from the land of the north. A great nation will rouse itself from the ends of the earth. Now this verse can be read two ways. It could be telling us about two different invasions. The first invasion is coming from the north. And a second one will be a great nation that will rouse itself from, not from the north, but from the ends of the earth. Is he talking about Temple 2 and the Romans? Now they will grasp bow and spear, and it is a cruel nation that will not have pity. And their sound will rage like the sea, and they will be riding horses equipped like a man setting out to battle against you, O daughter of Zion. The rest is a lot of repetition, but when you hear of its reputation, our hands grew weak. When they learned about the fact that it would be the Babylonians, and they saw them at the gates, anxiety took hold of us, pains like those of a woman in childbirth. Do not go out into the field, and do not venture forth on the road, for the enemy has a sword, and there is terror all around. O daughters of my people, don sackcloth and wallow in the dust, mourn for as if for an only child. Make yourself a bitter lament, for the plunder will come upon us suddenly. I have made you a fortress among my people, a stronghold, and you shall obey and test their ways. Notice he's really talking to Jeremiah, because you see the rest of the city was decaying around him. But he wanted Jeremiah to continue to tell everyone, hoping that there would be a change, or in the end that they could say, I told you so. So I made you a fortress among my people, Jeremiah, a stronghold, and you shall serve and test their ways. They are all the ultimate rebels, gossip mongers, brazen as copper and iron. They are all destroyers. The bellows are singed by fire, and lead is spent. The smelter smelts the vein, and from the dross it is not removed. People call them rejected silver, for Hashem has now rejected them. I hope you enjoyed the history lesson, because the rest of the story was not so pleasant. But that was the direction they were going. Anybody, any thoughts? Well, thanks for listening to me, I guess.
Well,
I just
I'm thinking, if you know what's coming, you don't have to be standing in fear. If you learn history, and you can learn from history, and you read and you see God saying this is what's going to happen, don't fear anything but me, we come out okay. No matter how it goes, we come out okay.
That's exactly right. May not all be pleasant, but we will come out okay. That's because we're spending our time repairing. We're doing what we're supposed to do.
I'm just
Well-
keeping it simple. I just think we really need to get our houses in order.
Well, that's what my wife keeps saying about my room. She says I do not keep it straight at this. You're not talking about that, are you?
I don't think so.
Okay. I would rather think about my room being messy as opposed to getting my house in order. It's a lot easier,
Yeah, yeah.
but you're more like Jeremiah. You're a spoil sport.
Don't try to be.
No. No.
Did
Hey.
you, Brett, did you by chance watch Brett Baer's, oh doggone it, the turkeys are just coming. Brett Baer's, he interviewed the new king of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, the Prince, yes. I
Yeah,
did not watch it, no.
Oh
I've
my
heard
God.
about it.
So interesting. It was so interesting.
It's hard to believe somebody could have a difference of opinion with the United States, isn't it? So, yeah, it was.
With Biden in charge, I think it's simple to be in, whatever.
Well, the
You want
question
this-
is he in charge?
I don't
So
think
that's
so.
what I was gonna say. He's not really the one in charge.
Well, but he's the head. I mean, he's the,
Visible
Um,
sight.
he's the, yeah, that's it. Yeah. But yeah.
So. So
And
thank you.
I say I don't watch him because I don't want to say bad words. So when he comes on, I don't watch him or listen to him.
That's okay. He doesn't say a whole lot of words at one time anyway without stumbling. So you're probably better off. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will
I-
see some of you in the next week or so
Yes.
when I come
yeah.
up north. And for the rest of you, shalom for 2
I have a
Sundays and a
question.
Wednesday.
I have a
What?
question.
Okay.
Donna's talking about us getting together Sunday. Can she send us kind of a time frame on that?
Sure. We're inviting you over to Marilyn's house and I'll
What
have-
time?
I don't know.
Know that. I don't,
What?
what, like
I-
4, 5, I don't know. What do you think?
Marilyn, what time would you like people to come visit you?
I don't care. Just don't expect me to do any cooking.
No,
Y'all think about it and
I don't
send out
care.
a text or something.
Oh, we'll
It's
send you a
Isn't that
text.
buzzing?
It's up
Okay.
to and Donna. They're in control. I'm
Oh.
not.
I know I'm not in control, so that's no problem. Anyway, thank you for talking to me. Note we'll be going home later with your kids. No, we'll send you something, I guess. All right. So, shalom, y'all.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you.
Yep.
Gotta figure out, okay.